Welcome to Inside the Bite. I'm Megha Mittal, your host from Shepherd. Nutrition to me is both in science and an art. And somewhere along the way, we've lost pieces of both. That's why this podcast was created. We are bombarded by products that are chasing the trends: extra protein, immune boosting, gut boosting, clean, natural, labels that all quite sound smart, but tell us very little. My mission is simple: cut through the noise, simplify the science, and bring insights to you that are actually usable. Every episode is grounded in real research, shaped by doctors and experts, and designed to turn science into practical steps you can actually use right away. So let's jump in and take a bite. Today, I have Hala Tajrine, a clinical dietitian who grew up in Canada and is currently practicing in Dubai. Hala, really excited to welcome you, and we have a lot in store today. So, big welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mega, for having me.
Would you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I grew up in Canada, Montreal, and that's where I did my studies. I graduated from McGill University in dietetics and human nutrition. And I've been in Dubai since 2018. And I do a lot of work in community nutrition. And I've done a lot of talks on the gut microbiome, obesity, food and mood, food labeling, among many others.
And you and I have been working together now for a few months at Shepherd. What made you feel that you wanted to lend your voice to a mission like Shepherd?
I think what I really like about Chef Doodle is that it really targets families at a practical level. So it really talks to parents with their real problems, their challenges, and it gives them practical information and solution.
Firstly, there is a challenge that most families are facing. One of our favorite platforms is Instagram, and we see a lot of good knowledge and some knowledge that may not be used. And I read a study last year, out of 114 balanced meals that were suggested on Instagram, only 3 were actually balanced. So I want to start there. What is actually a balanced meal? What is the science behind it?
That's a very interesting question because really it's at the core of how do you make balanced meals?
Yeah.
What consists of a balanced meal? So I would start by depicting Canada's food guide, and I think it shows us a very good description of it. So this tells us that half of the plate should be filled with fresh fruits and vegetables, 1/4 with whole grains, and 1/4 with proteins. So when you have all of these components in a plate, whether it's a breakfast, lunch, or dinner, whichever the meal is, you're on the right track of having a healthy meal.
Wow. And what is the concept behind having half the plate of fruits and veggies and only quarter of protein? Because we're hearing a lot about protein. Literally everything seems to have extra protein. So why is this the ideal plate?
Because it kind of gives the right composition in terms of macros, in terms of fiber, vitamins, and minerals. You don't want to go over with the proteins. You want it to be balanced.
So one challenge that I find as a mother, but also I know many families do, is the lunch boxes of children. So what are the 3 foods we should absolutely make sure is in their box, and what are the top 3 that we should avoid?
Creating a lunchbox is, I think it relates to what you were saying. It's an art, really, because you can put your little touches into it and make your child consume healthy food on a day-to-day basis. But ideally, what you want to avoid is processed meat, number one, because it's full of nitrates, it has a lot of salt, a lot of fat. And it's also banned as per the KHDA and the Dubai municipality. You should not be putting this, and it's banned in school canteens as well. The second food would have to be chocolate spread because it's
Right.
full of sugar, it's full of palm oil. It doesn't have its place in a lunchbox. And the third one would have to be hard candy, like all these sugary candies with a lot of shapes, and sometimes they are soury and they have different colors, and the child has their to that color, it changes. So you want to avoid it. Has a lot of additives. There's a risk of choking, no nutrients in there. Yeah, not its place. Doesn't have its place in a lunchbox. And then the top 3 foods that you want to include in a lunchbox, definitely you can include legumes because they have a lot of protein, they're low in fat, they have a lot of fiber. You also want to include fresh fruits because, kids spend like 6 to 8 hours in school. So fruits give them this energy burst. It gives them vitamins, minerals, fiber. It's very refreshing. And vegetables. Yeah, you want your kids also to be consuming fruits and vegetables at school.
The school is already half a day, and then, yes, makes sense with your balanced meal plate. What is one thing that you see parents putting often in the lunchbox that you wish would not be in the lunchbox?
I would say the one switch that I would go for is adding vegetables because a lot of parents
Right.
miss adding vegetables and they tend to add too many carby foods like croissants, biscuits, cookies. And so in that way, it's
Mm.
not so much balanced.
I know that nutrition science evolves quite fast and it's been evolving over the years. So, when you talk to the parents, what is one thing that parents have not caught up yet while it is very well studied in nutrition science?
I think parents haven't caught up that it's very important to offer a variety of different foods to the child. It's not really about the quantity. It's really about exposing the child to different foods so they are less picky, so they are consuming, getting all the nutrients, all the vitamins, and not being so selective with certain food.
Yeah. You're passionate about food introduction and you slightly touched upon it right now, which is introducing different foods to the children. Can you tell us a little bit about what is an ideal way to introduce food and even across the age groups? Because I understand that the food introduction doesn't stop anytime, it continues. It continues the exposure to food. So, what are your top tips when we are introducing food to children?
Yes, actually, this most parents don't know that there's a window, from 1 to 5 years, there's a window where you can introduce and expose the child to new foods. We can always keep going, but when we get to the teenage years, it gets more complex
Yeah.
because, the child also wants to like put their autonomy, they want to make their own decisions and whatnot. So we have to go through that window and we have to just keep on exposing the child. And what I mean by exposing is that they have to be, they have to see it. So we have to include all the five senses. They have to see you eat it. They have to smell it. Maybe they go to the grocery store and so to decrease the gap between seeing the food and then seeing the food on their plate. So it's very important that they're exposed in different environments to different food.
So when you say five senses, and what we see happening a lot, even if when we are going in restaurants, but also at home, children are in front of their iPads, they're in front of the TV when they're eating. What's your perspective on what it does to that introduction of food or relation with food?
Yeah, actually, I see that a lot in the clinic both ways. So some parents tell me that the child won't eat unless he's in front of the iPad or the TV, which is too bad because it all goes into this mindful eating. We want them to enjoy their food,
Mm.
to see what they're eating, and not to be distracted. So we need to be careful not to fall into that trap because it defies the purpose.
Right. So the child really needs to see the food.
And
Yeah.
it should be, family time and meal times should be like a quality time, right? So I know we're all busy. Sometimes, our work schedule, maybe we cannot be there for every meal with a child. But I think it's important to put in effort when we can
Yeah.
to eat as a family together and enjoy the meals
Yeah.
without the distraction of the TV.
Yeah, right, right. And devices in general, because a lot of parents are on their phones as well during dinners. One topic that I want to touch on is sugar. And it's been an interesting topic for us because I've heard everything from not knowing how much sugar should we have in a day to a common belief that if we do not introduce sugar now, or if we stop our kids from eating sugar now, they will crave it later and they will have a very bad relation with sugar. So I want to explore that topic a little bit. How do you think about, is there some truth to it that there will be a relation with sugar that's going to be unhealthy at a later point in life for children?
It's all about how we explain it to kids and how we illustrate this concept to the child. Because, Mega, sugar that's found in fruits is the same sugar that's found in a chocolate bar, right? It's glucose. So
Right.
the brain doesn't know the food source. But with a chocolate bar, of course, we're getting all the extra fat, the extra sugar, no nutrients. Whereas with the fruit, we are getting sugar, but also water, fiber, vitamins,
Hmm.
minerals, etc. So it's very important, I think, at the base to keep a healthy food environment at home. Our homes shouldn't be supermarkets where, kids open the cupboard and see chocolate bars and donuts and sugary foods or even crisps and chips and things like that. So once we have a healthy food environment, then the child doesn't have this urge to kind of have these foods. And we need to explain to them that, the bad effects of having extra sugar, it will cause tooth cavity, it will cause, problems with weight, etc. And once they grow with it, they will not crave it as much.
Right. I remember you talking about in one of our conversations on introduction of food to babies, not giving sugar too early. What's the logic behind that?
Yeah, actually, with food introduction, like you said, it's one of my favorite topics because I find this is where you have the window to open up
Right.
all the taste buds to the baby. So, because babies have sensories more towards sweet, you want to delay the introduction of sweets and fruits as much as possible. So, ideally, you want to start with vegetables. And, there's a certain schedule where you try a vegetable
Yeah.
every week and you rotate among the vegetables, and then you delay the fruits as much as possible. And later on, studies show that kids will be less picky. They will, because it will record the brain, the taste of these vegetables. So it's very important to delay the introduction of fruit.
Right. And when you say introduction of fruits, because there seems to be a limited understanding of what sugar is. And I will explain that. When I talk to people, there is a difference between natural sugar and added sugar. And everybody asks me, how much sugar can we really have? So how much sugar can we really have, Hala?
Yeah, because sugar, that's it. You don't need to have the added sugar, right?
Mm.
You can all, so ideally you want to get all your sugar from the natural sources, which are your fruits or your whole grains.
Right.
And you don't need to consume, extra sugar or added sugar from donuts or cookies, cakes, etc. And a lot of people, you're right, they don't know. They think that, it's okay to have a cookie every day. That's why a lot of time in the clinic, I give patients a food diary where they record their food intake and we can pinpoint the frequency. So how often are you having this donut and these foods should be really occasional food.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be a day-to-day food to have.
Yeah. I think a common thing that we all struggle with in the days of today is the birthday parties and the play dates. They seem to become quite a lot. And what I've seen, at least with my own children, is as they grow older, the birthday parties are lesser because there's a selection of friends and there are not that many birthday parties. But when they're younger, they're still in formative years. Everybody is a friend. So the parties are a lot because you're constantly getting invited to these different parties, which practically I calculated for my daughter every weekend she's in a party where she's going to be eating birthday cake. So there's a lot of training, it seems, we need to give to our kids on what to eat there, what not to eat there. And most of these are quite unhealthy just by the choice of what is given to the parents. How do we manage that as parents?
Yeah, I can sense that sometimes it can be very confusing and
Yeah.
challenging to parents. But I think with everything going on, it's okay if the child wants to go to a birthday party and enjoy their time because it's all under the occasional. So it's not a day-to-day thing. And as you said, as they grow older, these maybe occasions decrease. And
Yeah.
also because the child will be trained that, this is not a food that I eat every day. So they will also outgrow it.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that at least for my children that they eat less sugar and they just don't want to finish a piece of cake. They just can't. So I think that there is truth to what you're saying where they grow out of it. So that's a hope. There is another question that we receive from the families that we work with, and that is to do with peer pressure, the lunchbox peer pressure, where the child comes home and tells the parent, "Hey, my friend has waffles, or my friend has chips in the lunchbox. Why can't I get it?" How do you handle? What is your recommendation for families to handle that?
I think it's very important to listen to our children, what their needs
Mm.
are, what they are seeing, and all of that. I think this was also mentioned in another podcast where I think Coach Paulo,
Yeah, Paolo. Yeah, Coach
yeah,
Paolo.
he
Yeah,
was saying that, we really need to listen to the
yeah,
children. And then we would explain to the child, chips has a lot of salt, a lot of fat and whatnot. If you want to have it once, you can include it, let him have it as a snack. So it doesn't stay, like the craving doesn't stay. You can allow him to have a little bit, but always explain to him the reason why it's not an everyday food.
yeah.
And I think when we let the logic flow, it will resonate with the child.
Yeah. And we linked it to sports. Once a child starts doing sports, they also start to feel what is right. And we need to explain to them what food will actually help them in those sports, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. So, of course, also it depends on the intensity because, the recommendation for exercise for kids, it's an hour every day. Kids should go out and play. Now you're talking, I think, more about kids who do intensive
There are kids who are
exercise.
doing intensive exercises. Again, fortunately, in the current generation of children, there is a lot of emphasis on sports. There are kids who are doing a couple of sports, and one of our parents, for her 10-year-old is doing 6 to 8 hours per day, 2 to 3 times per week. So, of course, the question there is, are we giving enough nutrition to the children? Do they need extra electrolytes? What's your perspective on that?
That's also an interesting question. I think we need to go back to the child and listen. If the child is complaining that he's feeling tired, dizzy, he cannot go through his workout, then maybe we need to add in more healthy snacks. For electrolytes, it's not recommended because studies tell us that it's
Mm.
only needed when it's very, very intensive, like professional kind of sports, like an Ironman or a very intensive
Very
activity like
interesting.
that. But for a child, I wouldn't recommend giving electrolytes. I don't know. You were telling me also about your experience with electrolytes.
Right,
And
right. You mean Mount Kilimanjaro?
yes,
Yes, yes. Yeah, it's interesting. My fellow climbers did take some electrolytes. They put these energy tablets in their water. It was a 9-day expedition, and I didn't feel the need for doing that for at least the first part of the expedition, except the last night, which was the hardest climb all the way to the top. That's the only time when I needed electrolyte. My water bottle was frozen. So I had to ask a fellow climber to help out. And thankfully, we were a good team. So they did share their electrolytes. But yes, we were walking every day and climbing every day. But I did not feel the need for electrolytes all the way till the end because, of course, that climb was quite hard. So you're right. At least in my case, as an adult, I did not feel the need during extreme sports.
and that would definitely would be an extreme.
It was, it
Yeah.
felt like an extreme sport.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So
Yeah.
you wouldn't need electrolytes, especially for a child, going back to the question. But definitely before exercise, we would recommend like a fast absorbing carbohydrate.
Thing.
So like a fruit or an apple puree or something like that. And then post exercise, ideally you would recommend a protein food. So maybe a peanut butter sandwich or a piece of cheese or something like that, or a
Right.
yogurt, a glass of milk.
And I've seen that for myself while training for the climb. Whenever I did my training, I felt like eating more proteins after coming back, which kind of is a positive. We talk about a lot of negative vicious circle. Here it was a positive circle where I was exercising and then I would come back and have proteins. So it felt like I was on a good health journey. And indeed, if we mind what you're saying, I was not aware of the fast absorbing carbs, by the way. So that's a very good takeaway from this. The kind of intensive sports, but then combined with the right food kind of helps a lot. There is another linked topic to electrolytes, and that is supplements. I have seen supplements, and a lot of parents are wondering about it. I've seen extra protein. I've seen gummies, even for a 4-year-old extra protein. It feels like a battlefield. Supplements feel like a battlefield. So, what do kids really need? How do I know what my kid needs?
Yeah, ideally for a growing, a healthy child, we can always refer to the growth charts. So these are available online. There are like the CDC growth charts, and you can tell according to the child's age and their height and their weight, and you plot them on the curve. So if they are within the growth charts, then they are okay. If they are below the fifth or the 10th percentile, then maybe you can ask your pediatrician, why is the child not growing enough? Another red flag before going right away to top ups with supplements is to listen again to the child. Is he complaining that he's feeling dizzy, tired? Is he going a lot to the nurse at
Mm.
school? You know, kids are very energetic. They should go about their day without feeling tired and dizzy. So that definitely would be a red flag. And then maybe we need to do a blood test to see if they are deficient in a certain vitamin. But it should always be under medical supervision before we top up with a vitamin, because you know, Mega, also some vitamins are fat soluble, which are the A, D, E, and K. These vitamins get stored in our fat stores, whereas the B and the C vitamins are water soluble, so we can excrete them through the urine.
Right.
So we need to be careful, you know, when supplementing, especially a child, a growing child. It also depends on their weight, how much the requirements they would need for these vitamins.
So what would happen in a fat soluble vitamin for some of us who don't know?
So if someone, let's say, so I've had this case with patients, they
Yeah.
would kept taking vitamin D because they were deficient, but then They didn't follow through and they kept taking overdoses of vitamin D and then it stores. So it gets toxic, and you
Mm.
don't want to do that.
Right, right. And is that also true for children? Does that happen with children as well?
Yeah, that's why we need to be careful and follow through the doctor's advice
Yeah.
and be careful about the dosage and how much you are giving and when do you stop and you need to retest. So there's different factors involved. I remember also, the trick with vitamins and supplements, because sometimes parents think, oh, it's okay if my child doesn't eat his vegetables. I'm giving him the vitamins. So we also, as
Right.
dietitians, we don't like to go to that route. We really like to, have the child eat their fruits and vegetables and have a variety of foods before resorting to a top up.
Right. So you mean parents are replacing sometimes food with vitamins?
Because they just think, oh, it's easier. At least they will
It's a
they
pill.
will not be as concerned,
Yeah.
that, oh, at least he's getting his vitamin. It's okay. But we need to remember that with real food, we get fiber, we get other nutrients, we get antioxidants.
Right.
It's more complex.
Protein and iron are two biggest concerns that are mentioned by majority of the families we work with. How do I know whether my child is protein or iron deficient?
Yeah, this is also sometimes it's a concern for parents. So if they notice that there's a stunted growth, so again, they can refer to the growth charts or refer to check with their pediatrician. If they feel that their child is not growing properly, then maybe he is protein deficient. With iron, they would usually complain that they're feeling dizzy, they're feeling tired. It doesn't harm, to do a blood test to check all the different iron markers like the hemoglobin, hematocrit, the volume of the red blood cell, and all of that. Because remember, when the iron stores fall low in the blood test, it's like your bank account, right? When it falls really low, it needs 6 months to kind of recharge it. So we don't want them to be low on iron. And then the doctor can recommend which dosage they need. Is it in the form of tablets, of syrup? There are different forms to give
So,
it.
what is one sign that I can see? And I'm asking it also for myself in my child. I don't want to run to do a blood test right away. So what
Yeah.
is that one sign I should look for to say it is enough for me to go to the doctor and ask for a blood test when we talk of iron deficiency?
So yeah, with iron deficiency, they would feel dizzy.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
dizzy, lightheaded, tired. That would be a red flag for low iron.
Let's talk about diets because protein is linked to some of the vegetarian diets, and I'm a vegetarian myself. I grew up vegetarian. And now, when I dive into this topic of nutrition, I'm alarmed by how little protein I had, more or less. I mean, it was okay, but it wasn't great. And now I'm more conscious about it. We hear about Japanese diet, Mediterranean diet, vegetarian diet, and whatnot. Are there diets that are really good for us, or are there diets that are missing the mark on nutrients that we should get?
Well, I think because, I was born in a Mediterranean country, so I'm a big fan of the Mediterranean diet, but also because it's a diet that has a lot of studies that support its benefits. So it's a diet that's very rich in fresh fruits and vegetables, whole grains. It has a lot of fish and fresh seafood, a little bit of poultry, a lot of olive oil, and very limited in red meat, processed foods, and sweets. So, but generally, this diet, it's also has been shown to reverse prediabetes. It's also been shown to decrease depression symptoms and many, many benefits, across the board. And it's a diet that's easy to follow. Unlike, for example, the keto diet, where, patients cannot stay years on the keto diet. It's very hard to follow. The keto diet is where you move all the carbs and just focus on high fat, high protein foods.
Right.
It's interesting you mentioned the vegetarian diet, which you follow. But what's important to be careful about that, because you linked it to the protein, is that we want to make sure that we have complete protein. Because with protein, they are made up of little amino acid units. That's
Mhm.
like the building blocks of protein. And when we are not consuming animal products, we are lacking these essential amino acids. Essential means that the body cannot make them, so we need to get them from food. But we can get around this, for example, if we link certain plant based proteins together. So if we link rice and beans, rice and corn, if we combine these foods together, we have a complete protein. Quinoa, for example, buckwheat, soybean,
Mm.
tofu, these are all complete protein. So
Mm.
it's just really making and being a caution about or conscious to include these foods in our diet, again, with this variety, And yeah, you wouldn't have to worry.
Yeah, it's a common thing we heard, and I grew up in India where we say lentils and rice, lentils and rice. Now that makes sense why it is always lentils and rice to have complete protein. It's a very fascinating topic, and at some point we'll go into nutritional chemistry. So that's another area of nutrition that completely fascinates me because until recently I did not know the concept of complete protein. And all these extra protein powders, it still misses the mark for me.
Yeah, because with protein powders, we want to be careful also, Mega, because protein it's toxic to the body if we take too much from it. There are certain
Really?
requirements, per age groups and whatnot. But if we take too much, we're putting a load on the kidney. And the kidney is like
Right.
our filter, right? It has like the GFR rate, which is the rate that we filter the protein and all of that. So if we overburden our kidney, we don't need to do that with the protein powder and things like that.
So let's talk then protein numbers. How much protein do we need?
But actually, for adults, it goes by kilogram of body weight. So for
Okay.
adults, we need 0.8 gram of protein per kilogram of body weight. Now, for athletes, we may need a little more. So 1.5. Some athletes like to take it up to 2, but
Okay.
that would be, too much. I don't feel confident giving that much protein. But then, of course, for kids, because they are growing kids, it varies between 0.95 to 1.05 grams per
Okay.
kilogram of
Okay.
body weight.
So 1 second. So for adults, let's say if someone weighs 60 kilos, then I need 48 grams of protein.
Yes.
Is that about right? Yeah. And then for kids, you said there is a variation between 0.9, 1.05?
Yeah, depending on the age, like 4
Okay.
to 13. For babies, if they are 6 to 12 months, they would need 1.02 grams.
So if I were to translate that for babies, it would be if my child is 10 kilos, then it would be 12 grams of protein
For a small baby.
for a
Yeah.
small
Yeah, because
baby.
they're growing, right? They're
Right.
very rapidly. Yes.
Right. And for adults, you said 0.8. So if I'm 60 kilos, then I would need 48 grams of protein.
Yeah, for adults. And remember now, for adults, it also depends on their activity level. So some people who train, they might need 1 gram per kilo, or
Okay.
some like to go even up to 2, but I don't feel comfortable going that high to 2 grams per kilo body weight.
Right. Right. And what about kids in between who are not babies?
So for kids, let's say 4 to 13, they need 0.95 grams per kilogram. So it's
Right.
slightly higher than the adult because,
Right.
again, they are still growing.
Growing. So if my child is 20 kilos, that would be 19 grams per day of protein.
Yeah, you would just multiply exactly their
Yeah.
weight and to get a rough idea of
Right.
their requirements.
Right. That's very helpful guidance. So just from my mind map for a baby 6 to 12 months, if it's 10 kilos, then I'm looking at 12 grams of protein. If it is a child to 13, then I'm looking at for a 20-kilo child at 19 grams, and for an adult of 60 kilos, I'm looking at 48 grams. So now let's break it down. How do I get these proteins? Milk, cheeses, yogurts. Give me some numbers around how much is that?
Yeah, so of course we need to first figure out our protein sources, right? So these are meat, chicken, and fish, dairy products, and legumes. These would have your protein. So for example, for a cup of milk, you would get 8 grams of protein. I'm talking cow's milk because, almond milk and other milk alternatives will not have that much protein. And then, for example, for a cup of yogurt, we would have 11 grams. So you can just think, okay, how many cups of milk is my child having in a day? So you can roughly calculate. For a cup of beans, for example, or legumes, it's around 15 grams of protein. And then for a piece of chicken, fish, or meat, so around it's 20 to 30 grams of proteins. And an egg, for example, would have 6 grams of protein. So you can roughly get, if you look at your overall intake during the day, you can get an idea.
The reason I asked for the numbers, Hala, is there seems to be a thinking that we are always protein deprived. And that has to do with if we just go in the supermarket, we look at the number of products that say extra protein on those products, it automatically makes us feel we're not getting enough protein. But for example, what you said about, let's say a child needs 19 grams, a 20-kilo child, and has had 2 cups of milk in a day. How much of the protein intake has he already
Yeah,
covered?
that's already like 16 grams of protein, right? So
Right.
it's a big percentage. But I totally agree with you that there's this conception. I think it's been well marketed. I don't know why, that we need more protein. Let's go
Right.
and run and
Yeah.
after the protein. So we
Yeah.
need to be careful also. That's why, when we started talking about at the beginning of the podcast about the food plate, when we make sure that it's balanced, then we're on the right track. We don't need to add in any top ups, extras. It helps us navigate through our meals and snacks.
Fascinating because it brings a lot of stress to families. I can tell you the amount of time I got protein question. It brings a lot of stress. So this is very, very helpful conversation on proteins. Let's talk about the second trend that is around gut microbiome. And I was very pleased to see that that's also the area of work you are doing. So please explain to us what do we do to have a good microbiome for our children for a long, healthy life?
Yes, actually, the gut microbiome is a very fascinating, very in kind of topic the last few years.
Yeah.
Before it used to be called the gut microflora because we didn't know really what to call it.
Mhm.
But now it's really a world of its own. We call it a microbiome. And we need to think of it as like our community of bacteria that we have in our gut. There's over 100 trillion bacteria in our gut, Benga. And they really put a weight on our health. They really affect so many aspects of health, not just gastrointestinal health, but also mental health, our immunity, our risk for diabetes, for depression. So many things are linked to the kind of bacteria we have in our intestine. And you want to think of it kind of like your neighbors. So you want to have good neighbors that park in their parking spot, that don't make too much noises. And that's the same thing with your gut microbiome. You want to have the good bacteria there. And definitely, like studies show, if we eat a diet that's very rich in, like a carnivore diet, that's not good for the gut microbiome. If it's a diet that's very rich in fiber, that's what promotes a healthy gut microbiome.
It's so fascinating to me because the more I listen to you, the more I keep going back to the balanced meal. It seems like balanced meal is the simplicity of a balanced food plate. What you said in the beginning of our conversation seems to answer a lot of our challenges, and we can avoid a lot of noise by just focusing on a good balanced meal.
Yeah, exactly. Because even before, when we were talking about proteins, you said, parents sometimes are very stressed. How much protein is my child getting? And the idea is, as parents, it's already a very stressful full time job. We don't need to add extra stress to it. That's why I try to make it as simpler as possible. So 100%, if you follow the food plate model, you're going to get your fiber to, feed the gut microbiome. You're going to get your protein to have enough protein
Hmm.
and so on.
And to clarify, a balanced food plate means throughout the day balanced, not necessarily every meal has to be looking like that.
Now, ideally, I tell patients that ideally I want it to look like that at every meal. So let's say for breakfast, I need to see the fruits, the vegetables, and there needs to be a protein and a carb. And same thing for lunch and same thing for dinner.
Personally, breakfast veggies would be
A
something, a
challenge.
challenge for sure. For sure. Give me one smart thing as a veggie to put for breakfast for kids.
But cucumbers are very easy to go. Maybe olives, a
Right.
few slices of tomatoes. And, I understand that there are also different cultures with different types of breakfast. Maybe you can include it as a snack, the veggies, if you don't get them into your breakfast. Because sometimes, if you're having pancakes, it will be a challenge to put in the vegetables. But just keep that mindset to, include them throughout the mid morning. That would be
Yeah.
okay as well.
Because at breakfast, most of the times I've found it gets half left. And no matter how much I reduce the quantity of breakfast, it still gets half left. And I wonder because if I look at the child's day, they start with breakfast and then they go into snack and then they go into lunch and they come back and do a snack and then a dinner. I would think it is a lot. So, what is the reason why kids are not eating their breakfast?
Well, I think it depends also on the time, right? Because kids they have the distance that and the time that they need to reach from home to school. So that are they having their breakfast at home? Is it when they reach school? Is it in the car? All of these questions play an important role into the breakfast because when kids wake up, also if they let's say they take the bus to go to school, they need to wake
Yeah.
up very early. Sometimes they don't have an appetite for a big breakfast, and we need to understand and respect that because also sometimes if the car ride is very long, they may feel nauseated and all of that. So we need to be careful also not to give them and to burden them with a big breakfast. It can
Right.
be something small, because like you said, they have a recess and in schools here, The first recess is around 9:50, 9:45. So they need just something to sustain them in the first 2 hours of the school day. So it can be like a cereal bar with a glass of milk, a little one toast with peanut butter or a piece of cheese. It doesn't have to be like a large volume of breakfast.
Yeah, because see that's another trend that we as parents here and adults here, which is have a great breakfast and that will make your day. That is something it's been there for a few years now that breakfast is the most important meal until the keto diet of course came into picture and intermittent fasting came into picture. So we've been hearing breakfast is super important. I see that is still sticking with families where they're very much emphasizing on the breakfast of the child. How much truth is there to that?
Actually, yeah, we need to differentiate between children and adults, right? So, but for children, it is important because they have, let's say they had their dinner at 6, 8, between 6 and 8 p.m., right?
Right.
Ideally. And then they go to sleep, they wake up. And if they don't eat anything until the first recess, which is, at around 9, 10, then we're almost falling into intermittent fasting. And for a child, it's too long. And the red blood cell and the brain cell needs glucose to function. So they just need that little push, like I said. So maybe it can be a cupcake with a glass of milk or a piece of fruit or a piece of cheese with some apple slices. It doesn't have to be a big breakfast, but they need something to get them to sustain them throughout the day. And it also depends on their age. If we're talking about someone who's in the KG, a child who's 4, 6 year olds, they don't need a large quantity as someone who's a teenager and
Right.
so there's all these variables.
Let's talk about sleep because that came up also in our discussion with Paolo and Barbara, where we talked about sleep, how important that is, and structure. Is there any link to food?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because, sleep is so important. And I think it's so underrated these days. Kids need sleep. And if you look at the
Mhm.
sleep requirements, anywhere from, for kids who are 4 to 13, they need that 10 hours. Now, they need 10-hour plus if they are younger, and 10-hour, 8 to 10 hours if they are the older teens. But still, 10 hours is a big chunk. And I really doubt that kids are getting that. And if we are not getting that sleep, it plays a role in our appetite regulation and different
Right.
hormones. Our body needs sleep mega because it does something behind the scenes. I call it night at the museum.
Right.
Sleep, because it does something behind the scenes. It regenerates our neurotransmitters, it solidifies the memory. It's like busy doing its own thing. And we need to give the body this very, very precious.
Night at the museum. I like it. Emotional eating. We've talked about that as well before. Emotional eating in adults is something that we understand well. For children, when do I know my child is getting into emotional eating?
Yeah, again, it goes with, children are very sensitive. We need to be
Hmm.
there, really listening to them. It goes with what, Coach Paulo was saying. It's very important to listen to the child. What messages are they telling us? But emotional eating stems from a negative emotion. Usually it stems from boredom,
Right.
feeling lonely, sad, different emotions that will stem from this. So we need to be careful. If we notice the child is eating in secret, or if we notice boxes of cookies gone missing or things like that, then we need to be more careful about what's going on with the child. And we need to be very careful with children. Even when I counsel children in the clinic, I never talk about weight, or, we never mention issues about body image or things like that, because this will stick to them, right? It will stick with them as they grow.
Hara, I want to talk about picky eaters. It's one of the challenges a lot of us are facing. And I know that's an area that you look at. So tell us about picky eating, what it is, how does a child become a picky eater? How do we go about it?
Well, sometimes with picky eaters, it can be very frustrating to parents. We need to understand that some kids do have sensory issues. And there's that window, right, that we discussed earlier where we do the food introduction of foods to kids. But we have to remember that kids need to be exposed to a food at least 15, 17 times before they accept it. So a lot of parents ask me, what do you mean, Hala, by exposed? It means that they have to see it, they have to try it and not like it and try it again and again and again. They have to see you eat it. And that's how we break this barrier. And it needs patience, it needs time. There should never be like a confrontation or, aggressiveness when we are imposing certain foods to kid, but just having it available. Kids need to see it. They're not going to wake up one day and start eating Brussels sprouts. So it's very important to this again expose them to the food.
Yeah. And as a parent, if I myself don't like Brussels sprouts, how do I get my child to eat Brussels sprouts?
No, but you have to you have to like Brussels sprouts. They don't have to eat it every day, but you cannot expect something from your child if you don't do it yourself, right? It's like monkey see, monkey do. We need to be good role models. So they need to see you, have your vegetables, have healthy foods, not be eating fried foods and fast foods and things like that, so that they mimic also your habits.
Right. So Brussels sprouts it is, right? We struggle quite a bit with once a child does become a picky eater, and I'm talking about the progression. So let's say the food introduction has not gone well. And for a lot of parents, that is the truth, that it has not gone well. And we are now beyond that 5 year mark that you talked about. What can we do?
It's never too late, right, Mega? We have to always keep trying. So what we do is we try to negotiate a lot with the child. So for example,
Mm.
and that I see a lot in the clinic because they would tell me, the parent would tell me, oh, he doesn't eat any vegetables. And then the child would say, no, I eat, carrots and corn. So we have to try to find this midway and try to negotiate, okay, which vegetables are okay and
Mhm.
start with those, which fruits are okay and start with those. And then slowly try to negotiate, okay, which one are you willing to try? And a lot of times the child would tell me, oh, well, I never tried mushrooms. So how do you know, for example, that you don't
Right.
like them? So there needs to be this kind of work or pathway that's put there so that the child is more exposed and slowly, slowly reduces this fear from this new food. Because it's like, in psychology, let's say if you're scared of spiders, they will tell you, okay, first think of a spider, draw a spider, get close to a spider, then touch a spider, for example. So same thing with the food. They need to see what the food is. They need to see it. Maybe sometimes try to offer the food in a different form. So let's say with carrots, I try to make like a carrot bread.
Mm.
So change the form of the food, but it will still have the taste and the smell, but it will not visually be there, right?
Right.
And then you can try to offer it with their favorite dish. So with pasta, on a pizza, with rice, but slowly, slowly integrate the food. So there are ways that we can work with the child and the families.
Right. And what you're telling me is that as parents, first we need to also eat those Brussels sprouts.
Yes, yes, we need to be a good role model. It's very important. And then, it's also important to take our child to the grocery store to
Yeah.
have them initiated. Maybe go weigh in the vegetables, weigh in the Brussels sprouts so that they are, less fearful of this, what's this greenish kind of vegetable that's on my plate? Because that's what it is really. It's fear. That's why they are picky.
If you were to give families just four behaviors that protect their health long term, what would those be? What are those real foundations?
But I think it will start again with, healthy, having a healthy food environment. So
Yes.
keeping healthy food visible and unhealthy food, not available. We don't need to stockpile this. It's very important to eat as a family, to try to enjoy our moments together, laughing together. Life goes by so very fast, right? So we need
Mm.
to, and listen to the children. It's very, very important.
Yeah. You're a working mom as well. And it is a challenge to keep all the balls in the air. We know the tough challenge of just everything that we manage. What are some practical strategies that we can adopt as working moms to make sure that that environment is healthy and we're not just ordering in the food, but we're actually preparing healthy meals?
Yeah, actually, as you said, we're all short on time, So one way to go around that is all about pre-preparation. And that is one session I do with clients is that teach them how to pre-prepare meals. So grocery shop accordingly. So
Yes.
have the right ingredient, and then you just execute, right? You don't have to cook every day. I mean, in my household, we eat the dish every 2 days because we're also short on time. And then, I always ask also the kids, what do you feel like having this week? So they give me ideas. So you also increase the repertoire of dishes that you
Right.
are offering, and they're more likely to accept it. And yeah, that helps a lot. Pre preparation.
And perhaps involving children because now they are growing.
Yeah,
And how wonderful would it be to just do this together?
absolutely. And, as
Mhm.
they grow older, maybe you can have them in the weekend. Maybe, okay, you cook a dish or initiate them slowly, slowly so that when they're on their own.
I look forward to that day for
Yeah.
sure. I look forward to that day. Okay, we're going to switch gears. We're going to do Mythbusters, a section on Mythbusters. We asked our community a few statements and we asked them to vote on those statements. And these are parents. I'm going to ask you if it's a myth, if it's a truth or a half truth. Okay? 60% of the people in our community voted for this statement. And the statement is dark chocolate is guilt free.
It's tricky because we always hear that dark chocolate is healthy, right? But we need to check because some dark chocolates have added sugar. So maybe it's half myth.
Okay, so we have to check the label, I guess.
Yes.
Sourdough is always healthy.
Sourdough is cooked in a certain, I mean, it's fermented bread, right? So it's absorbed less rapidly than white bread. So I think they can have it every now and then. Why not?
Myth? Not myth?
No, it's true.
True?
Yes.
Okay. Almond milk is better than dairy for kids. And 1/3 of the community voted yes on that.
Actually, I would have to say no, this is not true because almond milk has very little protein, right? So 1 cup of almond milk would have only 1 gram of protein versus 8 grams for the regular cow's milk.
Interesting.
And also, growing kids, like 1 to 2, let's say, they will need the essential fatty acids present in cow's milk. That is not there in the almond milk.
Right.
So, not healthy, not recommended for kids.
1/4 voted on this one. Fresh juice made at home is very healthy.
I hear that a lot with the fresh juices, but with the fresh juice, what happens is you are squeezing 3 or 4 oranges and throwing out all the pulp, all the fiber. So it does have a lot of sugar, but it always depends on the frequency. If you were to have it every now and then, it's okay, but I would definitely not make it a daily habit.
Right. So it's not very healthy.
No.
Okay. So it's a myth.
Yes.
Okay. About 15% voted on this one. Multigrain bread always means whole grain.
Multigrain, whole grain. Well, multigrain basically has different kinds of seeds and grains in it. Whereas with whole grain is that we are using the whole grain and we are not removing the outside shell. So we're not removing the bran, and that's what makes it whole grain. But maybe for certain multi-cereal bread, they did remove the outer part of the shell.
Right. And that's also the difference between brown rice and white rice. So
Yeah. And like white pasta, brown whole wheat pasta. It's all about which part of the grain of the wheat you are using.
one trend that we should probably end.
One underrated, I think it would have to be on sleep. Again, with my issue with sleep, that, sleep is not important.
Right.
It's okay if you don't get enough sleep. Studies show if you get less than 5 hours of sleep for adults, it's definitely a red flag for having more diabetes, risk for obesity, depression. Sleep is very important.
Okay. One food rule you strongly believe in.
Rule is, I think, to have this obsession with vegetables. I like to see the vegetables added either as salads, to sandwiches, as side dishes. Very important.
And which is the most underrated food for kids?
Yeah, that was the vegetables.
Vegetables as well? Okay.
Legumes, I think, with legumes,
yeah.
it's we can add them with kids. We can add them to pasta sauces,
Yeah.
to salads, to stews. We can hide them, and add it here and there because it's they have a lot of fiber. So important.
Right. And yeah, it can be hidden in different things. Absolutely. Okay. Now we go to a very fun part and we're going to do the label lab. So I have some products for you here and we will see if we can analyze and read some of the nutrition labels. Shall we go for it?
Yeah, because I think with nutrition labels, it can be very confusing to parents.
It is. Let's start with the 2 big jars of milk there. Tell me about them and how we should be reading them.
Yeah, actually here we have soy milk, what people call, and almond milk. But actually, my God, they're not milk, right? So because they don't come from cow's milk. So they're basically made up of water and almond paste or soybean flavors. So they don't have any vitamin D, they don't have any calcium. They are very low in protein compared to cow's milk. So we really should be careful why we are consuming these foods if we decide to, these drinks, because we're missing out on so many important nutrients.
So are you telling me that it's not even milk, but water plus?
Yeah. It's it's water and something.
Okay, so water plus soya or water plus almonds, not milk.
Right.
Right. Okay. Because, when we go buy a coffee, it's always a question, Do you want almond milk or do you want normal milk?
Yeah, and they charge you more also for it, you know.
Yes.
But so it should be really for someone who has, you know, if they have lactose intolerance, there's also on the market lactose-free milk if they cannot absorb the sugar that's specific sugar that's found in milk.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be consumed unless you have an allergy to cow's milk.
Right. Right. Got it. So I have to remember I'm drinking water, not milk when I'm having one of these.
So you're missing out on the calcium, vitamin D, essential, yeah, all of that.
Yeah. I brought you a flavored yogurt because that is something that was very popular in my house for the longest time. Tell me about that one. What is the problem with it, if
Yeah.
there is any?
Actually, yeah, it's also very popular in many households. The only thing is that it has some sugar added to it, and it also has, you know, artificial sweeteners, a lot of preservatives and whatnot. So I'd rather the child has, let's say, a cup of yogurt with some blueberries or real fruit added to it. And it's also, you know, the label is very small to read, so it's also even difficult for us to get exactly how much there. It's difficult for if you're running around the grocery store and trying to read, you need like a magnifier. So I did take a photo from my phone just to get the exact number for added sugar, and it's around 8 grams of added sugar. So
Wow, in that box.
yeah, in that little box, so they're getting like 2 teaspoons of sugar.
Right. And I
Almost.
remember that the daily recommended limit for kids below teenage is about 19 grams per day, isn't it?
Yeah, so it goes up pretty quickly if we are consuming these products that have added sugar.
Right.
That's why it's better to go with a cup of yogurt, added fruit,
Yeah.
safer.
Before we move to the other items, I want to understand largely when we talk of nutrition labels, what is it that we should be looking at? Because there's so much in it. So what's the best thing? What are the 3, 4 things that I should know?
Yeah, so ideally, you know, like we said, with nutrition labels, it can be very confusing. And ideally, you just want to spot the sugar, the fiber, and the fat. And for some consumers who, let's say, they have elevated blood pressure and whatnot, they want to regulate their salt intake. So they want to have a look at that. So I'll just tell you quickly what the
Yes, please.
guidelines are
Yeah.
and what's considered a red flag for these items. So if you look at total fat per 100 gram, you should not have a product that has more than 17.5 grams of total fat. If it has less than 3 grams, then you're okay.
Okay.
We also need to look at saturated fat. If it has more than 5 grams per 100 grams of saturated fat, then it's considered high. And if we have less than 1.5 grams of saturated fat, then it's okay, you're good to go. For sugar, because I think, you know, it's a big topic now with kids and products that are, you know, very attractive to kids, we need to be careful. We need to have less than 5 grams of sugar per 100 grams. So,
Right.
so when we look at cereal boxes and things like that, this is what we want to be keen on. And if something has more than 22.5 grams, it's considered high. But, you know, 22.5 grams, it's quite
high.
Yeah,
I think that's a
exactly.
pretty relaxed
Exactly.
number.
So if you are even close to that number, you know, 15, 16, 18, it would be because, you know, also sometimes with these labels, yeah, they're telling you per 100 grams. So maybe you
Right.
consume more. You know, it depends on the product also.
Right. No, so that's a very good point because doesn't seem to be consistency across products or brands in when we talk about labeling. So for me, it was very hard to compare one flavored yogurt with the other flavored yogurt because they're all different sizes. There are different ways of expressing the label. There doesn't seem to be consistency, and it becomes a whole data analysis exercise when it comes to
Exactly, because sometimes, you know, they tell you per portion, and the portion is, let's say, is half of the container or, you know, 3/4 of the bags of chips. And so it can be like a math kind of equation to navigate through.
Right.
But ideally, to make it simpler, I would say you want to look at the sugar and the fiber. Like the more fiber there is, the better. So if it has more than 5 grams per 100 grams for fiber, it would be considered a good source of fiber.
Right.
And it depends on the product, you know, but ideally, the more you stay away from a packaged product, you are less likely to have these extras, saturated fat, trans fat, extra sugar, and all of these add-ons.
Right. Right. So less processed food. less packaged food.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. Do we want to pick a couple of others? I think we have. What is your favorite?
Yeah, we have this dark chocolate one
Brilliant. Yeah.
because we were talking about that before. And again, it's very, very small, the print of the label. But if you look closely at it,
And what we are doing here is we're trying to make a picture of, Hala is trying to make a picture of the label to enhance the image to be able to read it. So that's what we are working on.
yes, and then it would tell you that it has 6 grams of saturated fat, which is, quite high, and it has 11 grams of added sugar.
Right. So the
So per
dark
serving,
chocolate,
yeah.
wow. Okay.
So we need to be careful again with now this one doesn't say the percentage of dark chocolate, but ideally it has to be 70 and up, 70%, 80%. There's even 95% on the market. So
Yeah.
it gets more bitter, less sweet.
Yeah. I just before coming here, we got a dark chocolate that was sneaked in. I'm not happy about that. It's 70%, and we figured out it had 29 grams in 100 grams of chocolate. The chocolate itself is 100 grams, and it's 29 grams of sugar added in there, which means 1/3 of the chocolate is sugar. And this is a 70% dark chocolate.
Yeah, so
So,
it can be very tricky,
yes.
if you.
As a fan of chocolate, this was heartbreaking. Yes. What else do we have there? Let's see what you have.
So we have also a few a few bags of chips. So again, with bags of chips, we need to be careful because there's a lot of saturated fat there. And sometimes, for example, this one is a 50-gram bag, but it's giving me the nutritional facts per 30 grams. So it's tricky. Who's going to eat, 2/3 of the bag? And, I doubt that a child is going to, eat 2/3 of the bag and leave the rest. So, but it all goes down to, if you're not having these foods on a day-to-day basis, you're doing something right.
What is the problem with saturated fat?
Because saturated fat has been linked to being a risk factor for cardiovascular disease, having elevated lipids, elevated triglycerides. So
Right.
we don't want, it's not good for the heart, basically. And we want to go for the healthy fats, which is the ones that are found in avocados, salmon, walnuts, olive oil, and the plant-based products.
Right. And what is trans fat?
Trans fat is like the worst of the worst, right?
Okay.
You really want to avoid this one because it's been linked to, again, putting you at risk for many diseases, mainly heart disease and other diseases. And the trans fat is the processed kind of fat that is found in baked goods, in packaged foods, and it's just very harmful to health. And you want to avoid it as much as possible.
So I understand with the nutrition label, look at the portion sizes versus the grams that it's describing. Look at the different types of fats. Look at the sugar quantity that you've mentioned, sodium, if you have cholesterol that you might want to control.
Yeah, sodium if you have elevated blood pressure or
Yeah,
renal
okay.
maybe conditions that you really need to limit your salt intake.
Right. What is the best way parents can go about this? Because like we said, in the grocery store, it is very difficult to keep going through all of this. How do we go about this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, remember we were saying we want to keep it simple. So the simplest way is really to avoid packaged food as much as possible and just go for the natural,
Yeah. Yeah.
organic kind
I
of.
I think I'm going to for sure make a list of my top weekly purchases and then see what it includes, at least top 5 items. I think I would be very interesting analysis.
Yeah, because with the packaged food, it can be very tricky. I remember
Yeah.
in one of the webinars I was doing, I was describing a packaged food that was very misleading. The label would say real fruit, zero fat. But if you look at the label, it would have so much sugar, it would have some trans fats. So I would much rather the child would have, let's say, a toast and some jam rather than having this breakfast kind of processed option.
Ready-made option
Mm.
that is on the market. Okay, got it. It's very clear. Really, it's been a great pleasure, Hala, to have you here. We have a tradition on the podcast where we ask, what is one ritual that you would want to leave the parents or the families or anyone else, or recommend that you would want to do?
Well, first, I want to thank you also for having me. It's really great collaborating with you because you also listen a lot to your guests and to your community,
Thank
and
you.
you try to deliver a message that, they will really make sense of, that they will benefit of. And we can sense this. It's very genuine. There's a lot of misinformation, too much information, and that's not something that you do. So I think it was a great honor to be part of today's podcast.
Thank you very much.
So ritual, you mean like an advice? that I would give to parents.
What is one ritual that you do? And there have been different rituals, just to share what Paolo and Barbara said last time, for example, journaling, meditation. What is your ritual?
Yeah, I think because we all lead like very busy lives, it's very important to live the now, to know when to slow down so that you enjoy every bits and parts of your life, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that now there's a lot of information going on that relates to our kids, to our jobs, and everything. And sometimes it's very important to find the time to just disconnect, to really find that special time that you can sit and set your priorities so that you can take on all the responsibilities that you need to take to. So, really disconnecting from everything and
Time for
living,
yourself.
yeah, living the now, very important.
Again, Hala, it's been a pleasure having you here. There's a lot of knowledge to break down. I'm going to absolutely look back and get a lot out of this. So, big thank you for making time on a Sunday afternoon and coming here with me.